As the gap between Rome and the Reformers grew, attempts were made, consciously and unconsciously, to find a compromise between the two positions. The next cycle of false teaching, this time growing up from within the ranks of the Protestant movement, involved a very sincere man by the name of James Arminius. Arminius was born in Uitwater in the Netherlands. He became a pastor of an Amsterdam congregation and a professor at the University of Leiden from 1603 until his death in 1609. During the course of his life, Arminius rejected many of the teachings of the Reformation and returned to the semi-Pelagian view of Rome. In 1610, 1 year after Arminius' death, his followers drafted 5 articles of faith based upon his teachings. These 5 points of what came to be called Arminianism stood in contradistinction to what the Church of Holland had been teaching since the Reformation. These 5 articles, also called the Remonstrance or Protests, were then presented to the Reformed Church. The Arminian party insisted that the Church's statements of faith, the Belgic Confession and the Heidelberg Catechism, be adapted to conform to the 5 points of Arminianism. In November of 1618, a national synod or council was convened in the city of Dort for the purpose of examining the views of the Arminian party. 84 members and 18 civil commissioners, including 27 delegates from Germany, Switzerland, England, and elsewhere, were in attendance. From the first day until the synod's close in May of 1619, some 154 sessions were held. The result was an overwhelming rejection of the 5 points of Arminianism. Since the Arminian attack had been so focused and severe, the men who were part of the synod believed a mere rejection of the 5 points of Arminianism would be insufficient to stem the tide of error. They therefore responded to each of the 5 points in turn, formulating what has come to be called the 5 points of Calvinism.
What the Synod of Dort did was to reaffirm the confessional statement that already existed in the Dutch Reformed Church, and they reaffirmed it in light of the particular objections that the Remonstrants had brought against it. It's known today as the 5 points of Calvinism. But Calvin didn't sit down one day and say, I'm going to write my theology in 5 points and then write out these 5 points. But the reason they came out as 5 distinct points was because it was in response to the objections of the Arminians or the Remonstrants.
Dr. J.I. Packer, author of the classic work Knowing God, summarized the Arminian position as put forth by the Remonstrants. Number 1, man is never so completely corrupted by sin that he cannot savingly believe the gospel when it's put before him. Number 2, man is never so completely controlled by God that he cannot reject God's grace. Number 3, election is as a result of God, looking down the quarters of time, foreseeing that a sinner will accept Christ. Therefore, God elects those who first elect him. Number 4, Christ's death did not ensure the salvation of anyone, for it did not secure the gift of faith. For the Remonstrants, there was no such gift. What it did was rather to create a possibility of salvation for everyone if they would only choose to believe. And number 5, it ultimately rests with the believers to keep themselves in a state of grace by keeping up their faith. Those who fail here fall away and are lost. Dr. Packer concludes, Arminianism made man's salvation depend ultimately on man himself, saving faith being viewed throughout as man's own